Welcome ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm Grem the Lazy Gremlin and this is my new series, Tales from the Past. In this series, I invent characters for role-playing purposes and narrate their backstory, hence the name. I thought it'd be fun to try out something a bit different this time, so why not some RP to spice up your game? I'll be making these characters for various different settings and games like Elder Scrolls, Fallout, D&D and so forth. Feel free to use and modify any of these creations if the inspiration strikes you. So, let's get to it then. Today's story is about a former bard turned warlock, known as Wulgraf the Bastard. Wulgraf, otherwise known as the Bastard in his native village, was once a bard, a womanizer, and a self-proclaimed scoundrel. Born to a broken family as the only child, his father left at an early age, leaving his mother to fend for herself. The two struggled to get by day after day until Wulgraf was old enough for his talent for the bardic arts to emerge. He took to entertainment and quickly became quite popular with the common folk. His happy-go-lucky and mischievous attitude charmed many a patron and brought him a sliver of fame and fortune, which in turn garnered him the favor of the opposite sex. Fortune, however, only lasts for so long. Shortly after his 19th birthday, his mother fell ill and quickly perished under the ravages of disease, leaving Wulgraf alone and tormented by his loss. Lost, he packed his bag and left to see the world and find new purpose, to find a place to call home once more. Throughout his journey, he traveled from town to town, village to village, entertaining patrons at the local inns and more often than not, the occasional lonely housewife. He hid his pain from others, disguising it in the form of music, stories, and humorous advances, but in truth, it was all a facade. No longer did he feel the same light he once did. No longer was he fulfilled and content with what he was and had. Because of this, his demeanor shifted and he began to act more recklessly, throwing caution to the wind and ignoring the consequences of his many actions. This morbid revelry continued for years and years, threatening to unravel him by the seams. However, as is the way of things change, people change, and it all begins with a woman, as always. On one of his usual trips, he erred from the road, taking a wrong turn and somehow ending up in a clearing amidst the woods, surrounded by a grove of thick, unusual trees with darkish leaves painting the canopy. In the middle of the clearing sat a lonely tree stump. From it radiated a faint, warm glow that Wulgraf could feel wash over him in waves. Without hesitation, curiosity took him and he began to slowly approach the mesmerizing warmth, eyes wide. With his arm outstretched, he moved closer and closer to the source of his newfound bliss until he could touch it with his bare hand. As he did, the sensation abruptly disappeared and a series of images began to race through his mind. The images depicting the most absurd things, a sea of pure black, impossible geometry, dying stars, suns made of ice, and the face of a god. The images continued and continued until it all went black, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, like an angel, a voice boomed from the abyss. It sounded like beauty itself, he thought to himself, unlike anything he had ever seen, heard, or touched before. The voice didn't speak in any language he knew, or in any language for that matter. It felt as if she spoke directly into his soul, and he understood. He conversed with the entity for what felt like hours, maybe even days, or at least he thought he did, for in the abyss there was no way of knowing just how much time had passed. They spoke of him, of his life, of the emptiness and what he had seen in his visions. And the more they did, the more he felt it. Peace. Fulfillment. In that moment, he realized this was it. This was what he had been searching for, but he didn't quite understand what this was. As if sensing it, the angelic voice echoed, "You feel alone, empty in your existence, an existence without direction or purpose. I can offer you what you've always wanted. Will you be mine?" He hesitated for a moment and looked down at his own image, reflecting off of the dark ichor of the abyss like water. He stood there, staring at himself for what felt like an eternity, until his lips finally parted and the words slipped out in a whisper, "I am yours." As if falling from the heavens, Wulgraf suddenly plummeted face first into the ground. He was uninjured, but the impact left him reeling for a moment. He took in his surroundings and realized he was back in the grove again. It was quiet. He wasn't quite sure if what had just happened was actually real. He groaned out of exertion as he got back up on his feet, leaning on the tree stump for support. Still dazed, he rubbed his temple while trying to make sense of the events that had just transpired. That's when he noticed it. He wasn't alone. There was something sitting on top of the tree stump, where the glow used to be. It was small, scaly, and winged. A dragon? He thought in amazement. No, can't be, he continued under his breath. As if on cue, the small creature jerked up its head and looked him straight in the eye. A series of voices began to simultaneously echo in his mind. The angel, "Will you be mine?" His own, "I am yours." And then louder than the others, "Home." It was all real, he thought to himself, as he stared in a daze at the small dragon-like creature, and without knowing why, he stretched out his hand and touched the creature on the head with his palm. On contact, the creature exploded into a dark flame and was absorbed into his hand. The small winged thing was gone, and a gentle whisper rang out in his head as if to remind him, not alone anymore.